Game started.
El Jubilado. Okay, well, let's see. Time for e4 again, I guess. El Jubilado from Panama. Wow, that's cool. Okay, we have a Ruy Lopez. And I've never played the exchange variation. I've always played this kind of mainline move. So this is this is the delayed Steinitz defense that Christoph Zilecki, Chess Explained, has been playing that recently a few times. The delayed Steinitz. The Steinitz defense is just d6 immediately. So the delayed Steinitz is you kick it with the pawn and then play d3. You can play a delayed exchange. So a delayed Steinitz, delayed exchange. The way I played maybe is not best because black gets the bishop pair here. Yeah, so I probably played something inaccurately there. Okay, this pawn is under fire and it doesn't have the light squared bishop to support it, but I can always play d3. For example, if he plays knight to f6, I would have had to play d3, but now I can play d4 because if he plays knight f6, I can play d5 to shut out the bishop. And if he exchanges and plays knight f6, I can play e5. And my pawn structure is kind of a wreck. I need to get my pieces out and try and stir up some dynamic compensation for the loss of the bishop pair and the wrecking of my pawns. So is e5 a good way to start? I could play, if I play knight to c3, he can just kick it and then I'll lose the pawn anyway. If I play knight to d2, then it defends the pawn, but the knight is blocking the bishop, and also it's blocking the view of the queen on the d file. So I don't like either of those options. So I'm really tempted to play e5 here. But after takes, he can trade queens. Still. After he takes my queen, at least his knight is hanging, and I'll have to do something about that. I can take this knight, and he can take this knight and mess up the pawns over here. But then he won't have the advantage of the bishop pair anymore. So, well, let's just see what happens. It's out of my hands now. So, which one do I take? Do I take the knight or the bishop? If I take the knight, he takes my rook. I take his bishop, and he can escape by taking here. And so he'll have won. He'll be up the exchange. So I have to take the bishop, which is what I suspected. And if he plays knight to d7, hitting my pawn, I'll probably have to play f4. Maybe I should play bishop f4, just try and get an active piece, because my pieces have not been coming out. If you're going to have compensation for some material deficit, you need to get your pieces out. Your pieces aren't even out. You hardly can expect to have compensation. Okay, so let's pause and think. 4 against 3 and 2 against 3. So actually, I'm not down material since he gave back the bishop pair. The material is dead even. My problem here is strictly that of a messed up pawn structure. Okay, well, let's get the knight out because I want to connect the rooks. I also was tempted to play the move bishop to g3 so I can have the move f4 available if this pawn comes under fire. I guess I should think of the pluses of my position. One plus is I do have an advanced pawn here, which maybe at some point I can push from e5 to e6 and open up this bishop with an attack. For example, rook c1, pawn to e6, and the knight goes somewhere, and I'd be threatening over here. Right, so he's, is he going to trade rooks even? And I just realized he defended his, yeah, when I played knight to c3, I should have grabbed the a pawn. So now he's defended that. Well, let's get the knight out of the way so the c file is cleared. If he wants to trade, I'm allowing that. I still want to get a rook to c1, so after here, if he plays his rook to d8, I'm going to go rook c1. And then think about the squares he can penetrate on. He can penetrate to the third rank. The knight covers the second rank. He can go to the third rank and fork these two pawns. So rook c1, rook d3, hitting those two pawns. Pawn to e6, threatening check on this square check. Yeah, it's just a check. The king would go to, yes, I would take on c7. The king would go to d8 to protect his bishop. His rook would still be here. And then, do I have a knight move there? That would be interesting. I could also take over here. I'm going to try this. So I'm expecting rook d3, then pawn e6. And then if he takes, I've got to check. So maybe he just pushes the pawn, and then I can take on f7. If he takes on either e6 or if he takes on either e6 or b3 or f3, then I will just take here. I will still take here. This is it's not losing a pawn. It's attacking. It's attacking c7. And if he defends c7, then I'll take on f7. If he defends or moves the pawn, and if he takes this pawn, then I'll take. And after the king moves, I can grab the bishop, so that actually is winning a piece. So he can't really take this pawn. Okay, well, now he's stopping to think at least. That's always good. You don't want to play a game where your opponent didn't have to think. Okay, so he decided to defend the pawn. And now there is a square here for my knight. Knight there, check, bishop takes. But I should go ahead and grab this pawn over here while I can. And I don't think I'm going to be able to defend that pawn, really. He can play rook to f8, for example, yeah. Now, the only way to defend it is with the knight. If I play the knight to knight d6 is a check. Bishop takes, hits his rook, but then he plays rook takes pawn. And then, well, let's see, I could take his knight and grab the c3 pawn. Not so great, really. And if the knight goes to g5, he can hit it with h6, chase it away, and then play there. So is there any way... How about if I play knight here, check first? No, that doesn't seem to do anything. Just bishop takes, rook takes, and then he takes the pawn. Probably here is best. At least I'll have a bishop against a knight. That sometimes is an advantage. So let's calculate. Knight here, check, bishop takes, rook takes. And it's my turn. I probably need to play king g2 to defend the f3 pawn. It'll be 3 on 2 and 2 on 3, and I'll have a bishop here and a rook here. Well, I don't see anything better.
Check.
And what I was saying was, in this position, if I took the knight and he took back with a king, I could grab the c-pawn. But I couldn't do that right away because I would just lose one of these pawns. So I wouldn't even be a pawn up. Also, being a pawn up in this position is not so great because my pawns are so messed up. So now he's sort of encouraging me. He's asking me to take his knight. Take my knight, please. Knight takes, king takes, rook takes. And the rook is hitting the a-pawn, so he has to defend the a-pawn, probably king back. And it's just a rook and pawn ending, which is probably drawn. Okay, if I move my bishop out of the way and try and play with the bishop against the knight, he can penetrate with his rook to d3. I could play rook c3. And I can also put some pressure on the g-pawn here, so maybe he's not tempted to play right away. Maybe he's not tempted to play rook d3 right away. Okay, another long thing. What's interesting is the knight has no moves. Look at all these pieces are on squares that the knight might want to go to. Okay, so he's giving me a pawn. Of course I can't take it because of the check. Well, at least I didn't make that move. Let's defend the bishop. You know, that's a great central location for the bishop. And let's activate my rook. Now he does have a square for his knight. He can go here. And he's put all his pawns on light squares, so I'm going to have to push my pawns forward somehow. And my bishop doesn't have many squares either. But maybe h4, h5 would allow me to trade off some pawns over here on the queen side, or f5. Probably king. King to f3 is probably my next move. Bring the king out. Try and get it in the game. He wants to trade. I'm going to allow that trade and just try and play with the bishop against the knight.
Check.
It did help my pawns a bit. And my king is going towards the center. And the bishop limits where the knight can go, although he can go to... the knight can go to c5, and I would have to play b4 because there was no way to defend that pawn. My king is over here to defend the kingside pawns, but these pawns have to be defended by the bishop. But this may be one of those good situations where I've got 2 pawns that hold back 3 pawns. If these 2 pawns can keep these 3 pawns in check, then I effectively have an extra pawn on the king side, and I can bring my pawns forward. And no, I don't want to allow him to take my bishop. Now, has he got a check here? No, I'm covering those squares. So king to g4 is next, and then h4, h5. King g4, maybe f5 right away rather than wasting time with h4, h5, because his king is getting over here very fast.
Check.
There, he took. So now I have an extra pawn, a passed pawn, rather. It's not exactly an extra pawn, but it's almost like an extra pawn. Okay, the knight can move to a few squares. Where can I go? Go here, here, here. His king doesn't have many great moves because it needs to defend the knight. And so from here I'll probably just push my pawns forward. Let's see, the knight could go here or here to attack the bishop. Here, here. Yeah, I think I just want to push the passed pawn. I guess I should have thought about playing king to... no, that wouldn't have been a good move anyway. King to e5 would keep his king from coming forward, but it has the drawback that there's this check here with the knight, so probably don't want to do that. Okay, so now he's gone there, so he's attacking this pawn. So let's bring up the other pawn to chase the knight away. He can't move his H pawn now because it's defending the knight. And he can move his king forward, but he can't really move it closer. It's got to come around this way because the king and the bishop are keeping him out of these squares. And I'm just going to play h4 to chase his knight away, and I'm going to allow him to take here. So if he takes, I'll take back, and it'll be a case of one pawn holding back two pawns. I hope. That's my plan. Okay, where can the knight go from there? The knight just goes back. So now I want to get out of the way. There's no check here. That square the knight would check me from and that square the knight would check me from are both covered. And then when the king moves, or whatever, as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to push this pawn up to f5, and that will restrict his knight even more. Yeah, so one difference between the bishop and the knight in the endgame is the bishop can play on both sides of the board. So the bishop can sit on this side, help these pawns queen, and prevent black's pawn from queening at the same time. So it's really quite an advantage. And here, yeah, so he was able to move the knight before I got my move in, which was pawn to f5. Too bad, but that's the way it happens. So now he's probably going to try and go after this pawn. He can't go to these squares. He can come here and then here maybe. Still, I'm going to push forward. And then I'll need to move my bishop out of the way at some point so that this pawn can go the rest of the way. He just went back there. That's interesting. So now, if I move my king here, I think I'm getting out of the way so I can get my bishop out of the way. But also, it's interesting that his knight has no moves. His pawns really don't want to move. And, of course, that loses.
Check.
He was running low on time, so he might have lost on time anyway. But that was kind of a Zugzwang position, if we look
Black
at it.
resigns.
The king really has to move away somehow, and then I can come forward. So I think I'm slowly winning this endgame. But, of course, this is a sudden
Check.
end. So anyway, I will upload this and do a postmortem. See you guys later. Bye.